The transmission cut through the cacophony of the UN Global Crisis Summit like a surgical blade. Commander Elena Rodriguez sat perfectly still, her weathered hands clasped on the holographic display that flickered with the luminary's desperate message. Around her, the summit's attendees, representatives from every major nation and ecological restoration project, fell silent. The alien transmission was unlike anything they'd heard before, part plea, part demand, entirely dripping with a condescension that made Elena's lips curl into the briefest of smirks. Attention! Earth governance. The holographic translator rendered the luminary's communication in a clinical, almost mechanical tone. The Zornak Confederacy requests humanitarian assistance for the luminary ecological preservation zone. We require immediate resource allocation and technical support to prevent total systemic collapse. The room buzzed with murmurs. Dr. Quaim O.C., seated 2 chairs down from Elena, leaned forward, his dark eyes scanning the transmission's underlying data streams. Something wasn't right. "They're lying," he muttered, just loud enough for Elena to hear. She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" Quaim's fingers danced across a portable quantum interpreter, pulling apart the transmission's layers. "The ecological data they're presenting. It's incomplete, strategically so." The holographic image of the luminary representative continued, a tall crystalline being whose translucent form shifted with each word. Its communication was a masterclass in diplomatic manipulation, presenting their request as a magnanimous opportunity for Earth, while simultaneously implying humanity's technological inferiority. "We understand your species has recently achieved limited interstellar capabilities," the translator continued, the words dripping with patronizing tone, "and recognize this as an opportunity for developmental engagement. The Zornak Confederacy will provide minimal technological compensation for your assistance." Elena's laugh was sharp, unexpected. Several diplomats turned, startled by the sound that cut through the transmission's pompous dialogue. "Minimal compensation," she repeated quietly, "for saving their entire civilization." Dr. Sophia Chen, the team's cultural systems engineer, slid a data tablet across the table. "Look at their transmission protocol. They're not even attempting a full-spectrum communication. It's like they're talking down to children." The transmission continued, outlining what seemed to be a straightforward request for ecological restoration. But to Elena, Quaim, and Sophia, veterans of Earth's most challenging environmental reconstruction projects, the message read like a carefully constructed puzzle. "They want our help," Quaim said, "but they don't want us to understand the full scope of their problem." Elena's mind was already racing. She knew the team she would assemble. Not the typical diplomatic corps or standard ecological restoration experts. No, this would require something entirely different. Her communication implant, a sleek piece of technology that blended biological and quantum computing, began compiling a team roster. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, whose work in quantum ecosystem modeling had revolutionized Mars terraforming. Dr. Marcus Alvarez, an expert in adaptive biotechnology, who had spent a decade reconstructing the Amazon's collapsed ecosystem. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo, whose work in cultural ecological integration had transformed post-climate crisis Africa. Each name represented not just an expert, but a survivor. People who had seen humanity at its most desperate and most innovative. The luminary transmission concluded with what was clearly meant to be a magnanimous gesture. "We await your response, Earth representatives. Your preliminary assistance will be appreciated." Silence filled the summit chamber. Elena stood, her movement cutting through the tension. Her uniform, a subtle blend of diplomatic formality and practical environmental gear, seemed to embody humanity's duality. "Prepare the restoration fleet," she said to no one and everyone. "We're going to show them exactly what humanity can do." Quaim and Sophia exchanged knowing glances. They understood what was coming. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was going to be a fundamental reimagining of interstellar cooperation. The Zornak Confederacy had asked for aid. They were about to receive something far more profound. The restoration fleet emerged from quantum transit like a constellation of living machines. 5 primary vessels, each a marvel of adaptive engineering that defied traditional spacecraft design, materialized in the luminary system. They were nothing like the rigid mechanical ships the Zornak expected. These were organic mechanical hybrids, living systems that could reconfigure themselves based on environmental demands. The lead ship, christened Gaia's Embrace, was commanded by Elena Rodriguez. Its hull shifted and breathed, molecular structures realigning in real time as quantum sensors mapped the dying planetary ecosystem below. Inside the ship's central command, Dr. Kwame Osei stood before a holographic representation of the luminary planet. His fingers traced intricate patterns, each gesture causing layers of ecological data to peel away and reconstruct themselves. "This is not just environmental collapse," he muttered to Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who was calibrating a series of molecular reconstruction drones. "This is a systemic failure of their entire planetary metabolism." Yuki's augmented eyes, bio-quantum interfaces that could perceive molecular structures invisible to standard sensors, flickered with multiple spectral analyses. They'd been treating their planet like a resource to be exploited, not a living system to be maintained. The luminary observation stations watched in growing confusion. The human ships didn't just approach. They seemed to merge with the planetary environment. Adaptive shielding that looked more like living membranes than technological barriers. Reconstruction drones that appeared to breathe and pulse with an almost organic rhythm. Dr. Marcus Alvarez was coordinating the initial planetary diagnostic. His team of bioengineers and quantum ecologists represented humanity's most advanced problem-solving unit. They weren't just here to restore, they were here to understand and transform. "First phase initiating," Marcus announced, his voice calm despite the massive undertaking. Quantum mapping drones began to descend. They weren't traditional probes, but complex living systems that could adapt, learn, and reconstruct at a molecular level. Where a standard ecological survey might take months, these would complete a comprehensive planetary analysis in hours. The Luminary Scientific Council watched in mounting disbelief. Their lead researcher, Chief Analyst Zrentok, couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. The human vessels seemed to communicate with the planetary ecosystem in a language beyond technological transmission. It was as if they were speaking directly to the planet itself. "They're not just scanning," Zrentok whispered to his assistant. "They're conversing." Inside Gaia's Embrace, Elena Rodriguez reviewed the initial data streams. Each piece of information was a puzzle, and humanity had become masters at solving impossible puzzles. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo approached, her tablet displaying complex cultural ecological integration models. "The environmental collapse is just a symptom," she said. "There are deeper systemic issues in their social structure that are causing this." Elena nodded. This wasn't just a restoration mission. It was a comprehensive planetary rehabilitation project that would challenge everything the luminary understood about ecological management. The first wave of reconstruction began. Molecular-level terraforming drones started their work. They didn't just repair, they reimagined. Entire ecological zones began to transform, showing potential recovery paths that the luminary had never conceived possible. Contaminated water systems began to purify themselves. Degraded soil structures started to regenerate. It wasn't magic. It was the result of decades of human research in ecological restoration, born from the desperate need to save Earth itself. "They're going to realize soon," Kwame said quietly, watching the transformation, "that we didn't come to help. We came to show them a completely new way of existing." The luminary observation stations continued to watch, their initial condescension slowly transforming into a mixture of terror and wonder. Humanity had arrived, and they were going to change everything. The first formal meeting between the Human Restoration Team and the Luminary Scientific Council was anything but diplomatic. Dr. Sophia Chen stood at the center of the translucent conference chamber, a holographic representation of the planet's ecological systems, spinning slowly behind her. Her presentation was a surgical dissection of the luminary's entire planetary management philosophy. "Your ecological model is fundamentally broken," she stated, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "You've been treating your planet as a resource to be extracted, not a living system to be maintained." Chief Analyst Ren Tok's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. The human's directness was unlike any diplomatic approach they had encountered. Where were the elaborate introductions? The careful political dance? Dr. Marcus Alvarez stepped forward, bringing up a series of molecular diagrams that demonstrated the cascading failures in the luminary's industrial ecosystem. Each projection was a work of art, complex, beautiful, and utterly damning. "Your industrial processes create exponential degradation," Marcus explained. "You're not just destroying your environment. You're creating a systemic collapse that will eventually consume your entire civilization." The Luminary Council members shifted uncomfortably. These humans weren't here to offer polite assistance. They were here to fundamentally challenge everything about Luminary society. Dr. Yuki Tanaka walked to a side console, her augmented eyes scanning through layers of planetary data. With a gesture, she brought up a comprehensive timeline of ecological destruction that stretched back centuries. "We've reconstructed your planetary history," Yuki said. "Each decision, each industrial expansion, each resource extraction. They're not isolated events. They're part of a complex system of collective environmental suicide." In the observation room, Commander Elena Rodriguez watched the presentation with a slight smile. This wasn't just a restoration mission. It was a complete ideological intervention. Dr. Kwame Osei took over, his presentation diving into the cultural roots of the Luminary's ecological mismanagement. Charts and cultural analysis models demonstrated how their societal structure had created a fundamental disconnect from their planetary ecosystem. "Your governance model prioritizes short-term economic expansion over long-term planetary health," Kwame explained. "It's a pattern we've seen before, on Earth, before we learned to change." The subtext was clear. Humanity was offering more than technical assistance. They were offering a complete paradigm shift. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo's contribution was perhaps the most provocative. She began demonstrating alternative economic and social models that could support ecological restoration. Each model was pulled from Earth's own struggles with environmental collapse, showing how humanity had transformed its approach to planetary management. "Restoration isn't just about technology," Aisha said. "It's about reimagining your entire relationship with your environment." The Luminary Scientific Council was stunned. This wasn't the typical interstellar aid they had expected. These humans weren't just offering to fix their planet. They were challenging the fundamental principles of Luminary civilization. Chief Analyst Ren Tok finally spoke, his crystalline form vibrating with a mixture of anger and reluctant admiration. "You propose to completely restructure our entire societal model." Elena Rodriguez, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "We're offering you a choice," she said. "Continue on your current path to extinction, or learn to see your planet as a living system that you're part of, not a resource to be conquered." The chamber fell silent. The Zornak Confederacy had asked for aid. They were receiving a complete ideological revolution, and humanity was just getting started. The diplomatic counterstrike came swiftly and unexpectedly. High Consul Vexnera of the Zornak Confederacy arrived personally, materializing in the human delegation's primary research station with a suite of political advisors and military strategists. Their intention was clear: limit and control the human intervention. "Your proposed restructuring is unacceptable," Vexnera declared, their multifaceted consciousness projecting an aura of absolute authority. "The Luminary's internal systems are not subject to external reconfiguration." Commander Elena Rodriguez didn't move, didn't flinch. Her eyes, augmented with quantum-level perception, mapped every micro-expression, every subtle energy fluctuation of the alien delegation. "We're not asking permission," she responded coldly. Dr. Quame Osity stepped forward, holding a holographic projection that looked more like a living, breathing ecosystem than a standard data presentation. With a gesture, the hologram expanded, revealing intricate molecular pathways of planetary restoration. "Your current trajectory leads to complete ecological collapse within 2 planetary cycles," Quame stated. "What we're offering isn't a suggestion. It's a survival protocol." The Zornak delegation's attempts to interrupt were systematically blocked. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had already deployed a quantum communication dampening field, a technology so advanced it made the aliens' communication systems look like primitive radio transmissions. Marcus Alvarez revealed their true strategic position. The restoration drones weren't just ecological tools. They were adaptive systems that could reconfigure into defensive platforms in milliseconds. Each drone was a potential weapon, though their primary purpose remained restoration. "You misunderstand our capabilities," Marcus said, his voice calm. "These are not just restoration tools. They are a comprehensive planetary immune system." High Consul Vexnera's political armor began to crack. The humans weren't negotiating. They were demonstrating. Dr. Sophia Chen's cultural analysis projected a holographic representation of the Zornak Confederacy's historical ecological interventions. Each projection was a damning indictment, showing how their advanced civilization had systematically destroyed multiple planetary ecosystems. "Your track record speaks for itself," Sophia said. 17 confirmed planetary ecosystem collapses, 3 entire sentient species driven to extinction through industrial expansion. "You are not qualified to manage planetary restoration." The room temperature seemed to drop. The Zornak delegation realized they were no longer in control of the narrative. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo's contribution was perhaps the most devastating. She began demonstrating alternative governance models, economic systems that didn't just sustain environments, but actively regenerated them. Each model was pulled from Earth's own painful transformation, showing how humanity had reimagined its relationship with planetary systems. "This isn't about your political structure," Aisha explained. "This is about species survival." High Consul Vexnera made a fatal mistake. They attempted to activate a diplomatic override protocol, a standard Zornak procedure designed to halt external interventions. Belina Rodriguez smiled. The consul's communication systems went dark. Not blocked. Not jammed. Completely deconstructed at a quantum level. "We're not here to negotiate," Elena said quietly. "We're here to save a civilization from itself." The restoration drones outside began to pulse, not as a threat, but as a demonstration. Entire sections of the dying luminary planet started to show signs of rapid ecological recovery. Contaminated water systems purified. Degraded atmosphere began to stabilize. Dead zones burst into complex, interconnected ecosystems. The Zornak delegation watched in stunned silence. Humanity had arrived, and they were rewriting the rules of planetary intervention. The message was clear. They were no longer asking for permission. The breaking point came 3 standard cycles after the confrontation with the Zornak delegation. Deep within the core of the luminary planet, Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood before a quantum reconstruction chamber that defied every known principle of planetary engineering. Her augmented eyes blazed with an intensity that was part scientific passion, part controlled fury. "Initializing Deep Core Restoration Protocol," she announced, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of complex machinery. The chamber was more than a technological marvel. It was a living system, adaptive, responsive, capable of restructuring entire planetary ecosystems at a molecular level. Each component seemed to breathe, to think, to understand the intricate complexity of planetary regeneration. Dr. Quame Osei monitored the systemic interactions, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that looked more like living neural networks than standard computer systems. "Molecular substrate integrity at 87% and rising," he reported. "We're rewriting the planet's fundamental ecological memory." Outside, the restoration drones had transformed the planetary landscape. What had been barren, toxic wastelands now burst with complex, interconnected ecosystems. Rivers of pure water carved new paths through regenerating landscapes. Atmospheric processors, living machines that were part technology, part biological system, began to stabilize the planet's climate. Commander Elena Rodriguez watched from the command deck of Gaia's Embrace. Her communication with the team was telepathic, augmented by quantum entanglement systems that allowed instantaneous, multi-dimensional communication. "They're going to realize the full extent of what we're doing," Elena projected to the team. "This isn't restoration. This is resurrection." Dr. Marcus Alvarez brought up a comprehensive planetary diagnostic. The holographic display showed layers of ecological transformation that went beyond simple restoration. They were fundamentally rewriting the planet's entire biological and geological history. "Look at this," Marcus said, highlighting a complex molecular interaction. "We're not just healing the planet, we're giving it a completely new evolutionary potential." The Zornak observation stations went into complete panic. Their most advanced sensors struggled to comprehend the transformation happening before them. The humans weren't just restoring an ecosystem, they were creating something entirely new. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo's cultural reconstruction protocols began to interface with the planet's remaining biological archives. She was doing more than ecological restoration. She was piecing together the planet's lost cultural and biological histories. "The Luminary have forgotten more about their own world than they ever knew," Aisha reported. "We're not just saving a planet, we're recovering a civilization's lost identity." High Consul Vexnera attempted to intervene. Their communication systems were immediately deconstructed, analyzed, and neutralized by Dr. Sophia Chen's quantum communication interface. "No," Sophia said quietly. "You don't get to interrupt this process." The transformation accelerated. Entire mountain ranges began to reshape themselves. Geological systems that had been dormant for millennia suddenly burst into complex, adaptive formations. The planet wasn't just being restored, it was being reimagined. Dr. Yuki Tanaka reached the critical moment of the deep core restoration protocol. Her hand, augmented with quantum-level sensory systems, hovered over the final activation sequence. "Initiating planetary core recalibration," she announced. The entire planet seemed to take a breath, and then everything changed. Massive energy signatures erupted from the planetary core. Not destructive, generative. Complex systems of geological and biological regeneration that defied every known principle of planetary engineering. The Zornak observation stations went dark. Their sensors couldn't comprehend what was happening. Humanity had arrived with a request for aid. They were delivering a planetary rebirth. The first true negotiation began in a chamber that was neither human nor luminary, a neutral space constructed from adaptive molecular systems that could reshape themselves based on the psychological needs of its occupants. Chief Scientist Zrentok arrived looking fundamentally changed. The crystalline being that had once radiated bureaucratic arrogance now appeared translucent, almost fragile. The planetary transformation had shattered more than just ecological systems. It had destroyed their entire conceptual understanding of existence. Commander Elena Rodriguez sat at the center of the chamber, her presence both calm and utterly commanding. Around her, holographic representations of the planetary restoration danced, living data that told a story of rebirth and potential. "You didn't just save our planet," Zrentok said, their voice a mixture of wonder and profound loss. "You reimagined it." Dr. Sophia Chen stepped forward, her cultural analysis systems displaying intricate layers of societal potential. "Survival isn't about preservation," she explained. "It's about adaptation. Your civilization was dying long before our arrival, calcified by its own rigid thinking." The negotiation was unlike any diplomatic encounter in galactic history. The humans weren't offering terms. They were presenting a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to exist as a species. Dr. Kwame Osei brought up comprehensive ecological models that showed not just the planet's current state, but multiple potential evolutionary paths. "We've given you a blueprint," he said, "not a solution. A starting point." Dr. Yuki Tanaka's quantum interfaces began to overlay potential technological developments. Each projection was a living thing. Adaptive systems that could grow, change, respond to new challenges. The Luminary Scientific Council watched in stunned silence. "Your previous technological paradigms were extractive," Yuki explained. "These are generative. They don't consume. They create." Dr. Marcus Alvarez demonstrated adaptive infrastructure models, cities that could breathe, transportation systems that were living ecosystems, industrial processes that regenerated instead of depleted. Each projection was a radical departure from everything the Luminary understood about technological development. Dr. Aisha Okonkwo's contribution cut deepest. She began showing cultural reconstruction models, ways of reimagining social structures that didn't rely on hierarchical control, but on adaptive cooperation. "Your civilization's fundamental error," Aisha said, "was believing that control equals survival. Survival is about flexibility, about understanding that you are part of a system, not separate from it." High Consul Vexnera, now relegated to an observer status, watched the negotiations with a mixture of terror and reluctant admiration. The humans weren't conquering. They were teaching. Elena Rodriguez leaned forward. "We're not here to replace your civilization," she said quietly. "We're here to show you how to save yourselves." The chamber shifted. Molecular systems responded to the emotional intensity of the conversation, creating visual representations of potential futures. Landscapes of possibility loomed and dissolved, showing multiple paths of planetary and cultural development. Srentok's response came slowly. "Why?" they asked. "Why go to such lengths to save a civilization that was not your own?" It was the question that had burned at the core of their encounter. Dr. Kwame Osei stepped forward. "Because the universe is more complex than conquest," he said. "Because every civilization represents a unique possibility of existence. The humans weren't offering salvation. They were offering a partnership. A chance to reimagine everything. The Luminary were being given more than a restored planet. They were being offered a future they could never have imagined." The transformation became a galactic beacon. Within 6 standard cycles, the Luminary planet had become something unprecedented. A living laboratory of planetary regeneration that drew the attention of multiple galactic civilizations. Research vessels from dozens of star systems arrived, their sensors probing the impossible resurrection that humanity had orchestrated. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood in the primary research complex, her augmented eyes tracking the complex molecular interactions that continued to evolve across the planetary ecosystem. The restoration was no longer a process. It had become a living system of perpetual adaptation. "We're not just watching evolution," she explained to a delegation of xenobiologists. "We're participating in it." Dr. Marcus Alvarez's adaptive infrastructure projects had become the true marvel. Cities that were more like living organisms than static constructions. Transportation networks that breathed and responded. Industrial complexes that generated more ecological diversity than they consumed. Traditional infrastructure is about control, Marcus would say during his presentations. This is about conversation, about becoming part of the ecosystem, not separate from it. Commander Elena Rodriguez oversaw the broader transformation. Her quantum communication systems maintained a delicate balance between supporting the Luminary's emerging independence and providing critical guidance. The humans were not colonizers. They were midwives to a planetary rebirth. Dr. Kwame Osei's ecological modeling systems had become something between science and art. Each projection was a living narrative of potential, showing not just what could be, but the infinite paths of possibility that existed within a complex system. Ecology is not a science of prediction, Kwame would explain. It's a science of potential. The Zornak Confederacy watched with a mixture of terror and fascination. What had begun as a simple request for aid had become a fundamental challenge to their entire understanding of interstellar development. Dr. Sophia Chen's cultural reconstruction protocols had gone far beyond simple preservation. She was helping the luminary rediscover their own lost histories, their forgotten potential. Ancient cultural archives were not just recovered, they were reanimated, brought back to life with a vibrancy that spoke to the depth of human restoration technology. "We don't restore cultures," Sophia explained. "We create the conditions for cultures to restore themselves." Dr. Aisha Okonkwo's social system models were perhaps the most radical transformation. New forms of governance emerge, adaptive, fluid systems that responded to ecological and social changes with unprecedented speed and nuance. Collaborative research centers sprouted across the planet. Luminary scientists worked alongside human experts, but not as subordinates. As partners, as fellow explorers of possibility. The first interstellar conference on planetary restoration became a turning point. Delegations from across known space gathered to understand what had happened to the luminary planet. Elena Rodriguez's presentation was simple and devastating. "We didn't save a planet," she said. "We created a framework for survival." The adaptive technologies developed during the luminary restoration began to spread. Other planetary ecosystems facing collapse suddenly had a new model, a new possibility. Zrentok, once a rigid bureaucratic leader, now stood as a transformation advocate. The crystalline being had become something else, a living symbol of the potential for fundamental change. "We asked for aid," Zrentok would later say in Galactic broadcasts. "We received a revolution." The restoration fleet began to prepare for departure. But this was not an ending. It was a beginning. Humanity had arrived with a simple request for help. They were leaving having rewritten the rules of galactic existence. The universe watched and began to understand that everything was possible. The final gathering happened not on the restored luminary planet, but in the vast observation deck of Gaia's Embrace, the ship that had become a symbol of humanity's transformative potential. Commander Elena Rodriguez stood at the center, surrounded by her team and representatives from across the galaxy. The holographic displays around them showed the intricate web of planetary restorations that had begun to spread from the original luminary intervention. "We didn't come to conquer," Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of their journey. "We came to demonstrate a fundamental truth about survival." Dr. Kwame Osei stepped forward, bringing up complex ecological models that danced with potential. Each projection was a living testament to the power of adaptive systems. "Survival is not about resistance," he explained. "It's about conversation, about becoming part of something larger than yourself." The gathered representatives, a diverse collection of species from across known space, listened in profound silence. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's quantum interfaces began to overlay the transformation stories. Dozens of planets that had been on the brink of ecological collapse now showed signs of regeneration, not through human intervention, but through the frameworks of understanding they had shared. "We gave them a language," Yuki said, "a way of seeing that transcends technology, a way of understanding that every system is alive, is connected." Dr. Marcus Alvarez demonstrated the adaptive infrastructure models that had emerged from the luminary restoration. Cities that breathed, transportation networks that generated ecological diversity, industrial systems that created more than they consumed. "This is not about technology," Marcus explained. "This is about reimagining our relationship with the systems we inhabit." Dr. Sophia Chen's cultural reconstruction protocols had become a galactic phenomenon. Indigenous knowledge systems, long suppressed or forgotten, were being rediscovered and integrated into planetary management strategies. "We don't preserve cultures," Sophia said. "We create the conditions for cultures to preserve themselves." Dr. Aisha Okonkwo brought up the new governance models that had emerged. Adaptive systems that responded to ecological and social changes with unprecedented speed and nuance. Collaborative frameworks that challenged everything known about political organization. "Power is not about control," Aisha explained. "It's about conversation, about creating spaces where potential can emerge. Zrentok, the luminary chief scientist who had transformed from a rigid bureaucrat to a beacon of change, stood as a living testament to the intervention's impact. The crystalline being now represented a new form of leadership, one based on adaptation, on possibility. "We asked for aid," Zrentok said, addressing the gathered representatives. "We received a revolution." The holographic displays showed the expanding network of planetary restorations. Each intervention was unique. Each approached through the specific needs of the ecosystem, the culture, the potential of the civilization involved. High Consul Vexnera of the Zornak Confederacy, once an opponent, now a reluctant admirer, spoke next. "We misunderstood intervention," they admitted. "We saw it as a form of control. Humanity showed us it could be a form of conversation." Elena Rodriguez made the final statement. Simple, profound. "We are not saviors," she said. "We are participants. Every civilization represents a unique possibility of existence. Our job is not to rescue. Our job is to create the conditions for potential to emerge." The restoration fleet prepared for departure. But this was not an ending. It was a beginning. As Gaia's embrace prepared to quantum transit, the holographic displays showed a living network of planetary transformations, a testament to what was possible when humanity approached the universe, not as conquerors, but as partners. They had arrived with a request for aid. They were leaving having rewritten the rules of galactic existence. The universe watched, and began to understand that everything was possible.